First up, we have our opening keynote from Greg van der Gaast, Head of Cybersecurity at the University of Salford, who is going to share his thoughts on how, when it comes to security, we can influence to win. Thank you so much for joining me, Greg.
Thank you very much for having me. I'll get started. So today I think the original topic of this conversation was going to be, do we really need more tools? And it's something I covered, but I also wanted to, there was a bit of a last minute change because I want to take the opportunity to talk more about the human side of things and influencing. So I'm currently working on a book called Influencing InfoSec, so I thought that would be a fitting title for this presentation. So let's get started by telling you a little bit more about me. So my name is Greg van der Gaast. I've been doing this cyber thing for 22 years. I feel every one of those years. I started out, I don't have a traditional kind of security background. I'm actually a high school dropout. I started out as a teenage hacker in a group called Millworm that those of you around in the late 90s might have heard of. It was actually classified as one of the most infamous hacking collectives, along with Anonymous, Kevin Mitnick. I actually appear in Kevin Mitnick's, one of his books under a few aliases. He still won't accept my LinkedIn invitation. Know a few people from Anonymous. And I think we're most famous for hacking India's nuclear weapons program. So that got me quite a bit of attention, along with a visit from several gentlemen from the Defense Department in the States. And they made me a job offer that I couldn't refuse. They're quite adamant about the couldn't refuse part. And I spent about 3 years working undercover operations for them and the FBI and other parts of the government in the US. After leaving that, I went into more kind of traditional security roles. I was a consultant. I helped develop in-field communication networks for NATO, for KFOR and ISAF in Kosovo and Afghanistan. I was also the security lead for the architecture group at CGI. Did a lot of contracting, big companies, this kind of thing. Now, in particular, one of the things I noticed from my hacking days and my kind of intelligence days at the government, I've seen a lot of breaches. I've caused my fair share, and I've seen hundreds more. And it always occurred to me that a lot of these companies were spending a lot of money on security, and a lot of them had all kinds of accreditations and frameworks and this and that going on, but it didn't help them. And even to this day, when I see sophisticated nation-state attack or a sophisticated cyber attack, it's usually an unpatched system or a server they didn't know about, or SQL injection from the late 90s. And that led me to create, kind of shift direction, or rather, because I never had that formal education, I just did, well, what works? So I started the clean sheet, bespoke InfoSec programs around the business. Like, what do we do? How do I build security around our specific business processes, our specific IT processes? And that kind of brought me more into kind of leadership positions. And today I'm the head of information security at the University of Salford. That's quite a challenge. I also guest lecture there. I offer an information security leadership course there and through some other providers. I have my own security advisory called CMCG. And I recently released a book called Rethinking InfoSec. There's a gentleman out there called Love Goats who gave it a 2-star, but everybody else seems to really, really like it. So that's me. So let me get started with the rest. Those of you that have a LinkedIn account, which hopefully is most of you, will probably have seen this picture, those of you in InfoSec anyway. And it's a picture that always gets a lot of reactions and a lot of comments. It's cybersecurity sitting at the little kids table and the board of directors chap coming over and inviting us to the big kids table. And always a lot of reactions and everyone complaining and saying, yes, we should be there. We should be reporting to the board. They don't listen to us. They don't understand how important we are, all this and that. I hate this picture with a passion, because if we were ready to report at board level, we would be reporting at board level. It doesn't take them very long at all to identify people who have value and bring them to that table. Now, the fact that we've not taken the steps to get ourselves there is very much our fault. And it's something we need to work on, because if we don't influence, we're not going to have any chance of providing effective assurance for organizations. Because information security is, like the original title of the presentation, we're focusing so much on tooling and standards and best practices and compliance and frameworks. But really, it's about providing holistic assurance. And that means you have to have engagement through the entire business. You have to have the ability to see and influence. And until we start doing that, we're never going to fill the cracks. And we're going to keep getting our butts handed to us by the silliest little things while we spend tens of millions on the next gen AI-powered blockchain, yada, yada, yada. So if you do get to the board table, what would you even say? And that's what, that's where where the debate kind of stops, because everyone's complaining about wanting to go there. But then what? And the fact is we're not being proactive about getting there. And the fact that we're not proactive about getting there is a sign we're not ready. We wouldn't be able to act appropriately once we do get there. And there's so much discussion about where does the CISO fit in the org chart. And the org chart is irrelevant. Interpersonal communication is completely independent of some lines on the chart. And you can be 5 levels down from the board. That doesn't mean you can't engage your CFO, your COO, or even your CEO. It's all about personal relationships. And that's something that people don't realize. And they kind of expect that authority in that position to be handed to them without really earning it. The other thing is, board members don't live there. Again, there's nothing stopping you from having a chat with your C-level in the hall, as long as you have something worth saying. Otherwise, there's no point in doing it. You're just going to look silly. Politics in the room is the other thing. A lot of people want to drive change. They feel frustrated. There's resistance. But how are you going to deal with it? I've had a situation in recent years where I had a CIO that I reported up to who told me there was no security budget, that it wasn't a board priority, that they didn't care. When the whole time there was security budget, and they did care. But he was lying to me, and he was using that money to do other things. How do you go around that? How are you going to report that to the board to solve the problem at that level when that individual is sitting across from the table? You have to make this more about personal relationships. So the big question is, what do we say when we get there, right? But first, I want to take a detour. I want to talk about emotional investment and bias, and how in information security we live a little bit in a bubble. I've got 2 graphs here, and I've deliberately taken the titles and the scales off of them to make a point. And part of the topic is an emotionally or a politically charged one, let's say. It has a lot of emotional investment in it, and that's why I like it, because it proves the point. So I've got a graph here of the gun ownership rate per capita in the United States and the murder rate per capita in the United States. And when I show this graph at conferences, I usually get a chuckle from the audience, because everyone's thinking, well, pretty clear correlation there, right? And the interesting thing is, you can go to these people and you can tell them, you can give them numbers and examples and all these business cases or justifications, whatever. They'll always have an anecdote. Yeah, but Uncle Bobber once in '92 and this and that. And it doesn't matter how much you present them the facts, they will resist you. They will resist the argument because of that emotional investment that they have. Now, the other graph is information security spending, or rather information investment, and the impact of breaches, just the losses. So impact slash cost, right? And as you'd expect, or you would expect, security spending goes up and the amount of losses to security incidents goes down. The thing is, you probably think I'm talking about the graph on the right now, but I'm not. The dark blue line is the gun ownership rate per capita in the States, and the light blue line is the murder rate. And just about every single statistic backs this up. An armed society is a polite society. It works. But what about all the shootings? Yes, the ones in the gun-free zones, the ones who have been disarmed, the ones where there's no deterrent. And this is very politically sensitive. This is something that the media and other things have galvanized us in. And I'm willing to bet half the people right now are, in their minds, half the people listening are trying to find fault with the argument and are strongly disagreeing. But they're not necessarily open to taking a step back and looking at this big picture. And that's the power of emotional investment. That's why it's so difficult to overcome. And that is a key element of influencing. Because no matter, you have to overcome that emotional investment. You have to create your own emotional investment in people. So that's very important. So the real question is the graph on the right. Why is it that we're spending more and more money and things are just getting worse and worse all the time? And the thing is, I've taken the scales off of this The real picture is actually worse still. So here I have a graph, and as you can see, they're not actually kind of linear, they don't follow each other. In blue we have spending, and in yellow we have losses. We're spending more and more, but the losses are actually getting worse. They're running away from us, they're increasing exponentially. And because we're stuck in that bubble of this is how we do things, and we're not taking a step back to look at the big picture and what's actually causing this and how do we actually address this problem. And this is why I had an interview recently that everyone's talking about we need more standardization, we need more enforcement, we need to tell people how to do it. No, I don't think we do, because we're standardizing an approach that doesn't work. That's not a good idea. You're just creating more dogma to an approach that's heavily flawed. More and more complexity, more and more automation. And we keep hearing about this information security skills gap of, I'm using ISC squared numbers here, 4,070,000 people. I saw this at the presentation. And a growing number of breaches despite all of this. So it's not, we call these our information security kind of pains, that's what I call them. But in reality, it's our comfort zone. This is what we are used to. This is what we kind of use to justify where we are and why we need more of everything. But I think we need to take a step back and be a little more humble, a bit more altruistic, and ask ourselves, how do we become good servant leaders? How do we actually contribute to organizations? So to answer the question of, and this is, I think, a key reason why it's difficult to sell information security often, because we're very frustrated that people don't understand what we're saying. But are they wrong not to understand it? Does it actually make sense? Or are we so neck deep in it that we don't see the bigger picture anymore? I've got two stories. By the way, stories and analogies are great. You can explain things to anyone with analogies, right? So the first analogy is the electrical junction box. So this is the, whatever you call it here in the UK or wherever you're watching from, all your electrical connections come into your house, and it's where you've got your fuses and your breakers and all that stuff. So that's sitting on your kitchen wall, and it blows up, it burns out. You call an electrician, he comes in, he looks at it, I have to change the whole thing, he gives you a bill, and he leaves. A week later, it blows up again. Call him back, he comes back in, replaces it again, and he leaves. Gives you a bill, and leaves. A week later, it blows up again. This time he says, you know what, I'm going to put a bigger one in. Costs a bit more, but should be better. Okay, he leaves, gives you the bill. 2 weeks later, it blows up. You call him back, puts in an even bigger one. This time it lasts a month. And so on and so forth for another half a dozen iterations. And next thing you know, you've got this massive industrial junction box on your kitchen wall, take half the kitchen. But it only blows up every couple of years. And then someone else comes along, someone who is not an electrician, who looks at the junction box, cannot help but notice that's a really big junction box, looks up and then asks you the question, how long's that water pipe up there been leaking onto it? And this is what the analogy I came up with to explain someone in security who is like a virtual CISO has his own consultancy, when he was saying you shouldn't get involved in patching. We shouldn't get involved in asset management. We shouldn't get involved in IT operations because that's IT's job. Our engagement should be limited to writing a policy. And I think that's fundamentally wrong because that's where 95% of our workload is coming from gaps in those areas. And we have to address them. Now you have to understand IT does things from a functional basis. If it delivers the expected outcome, that's their job done. Their job is filling the tub in the bathroom. They don't care about a couple of drops coming out of the pipe somewhere else. So we have to get much more involved, and we have to help people see things this way, but also take over them. And sure, it may seem like extra work, but it's going to save us so much work in the end. It's going to save the company money. It's going to simplify things, and it's going to provide greater assurance overall. Because the hard thing is not to have the best, the 100-foot high wall with the best latest technology. The hard part is getting a decent level of information assurance of security consistently, holistically through the organization. That's where we fail. That's when you see all these breaches that are happening because, well, they didn't know they got MageCart installed on them, or they didn't have architectural standards that led to an S3 bucket leaking, or they didn't have good patching, or they had good patching, but we didn't know about that server. Yeah, because you had issues with your asset management. So security relies on a foundation of you have to have a perfect foundation. You have to have as absolutely perfect truth and visibility as you can get. And as long as we have that, building on top of that is pointless And we can't keep deferring to them and saying it's not our fault. And we have to get involved on that. Oh, I've lost my presentation, apparently. And I'm back. And as I was saying, and this is actually from a different presentation, but the vast majority of these data breaches, these really big fines, British Airways, Marriott, Equifax, Capital One, Travelex, these were simple stuff. This is like SQL injection. This is servers being missed and therefore not patched. This is patches on VPN gateways that they knew were missing and they didn't update them. Their IT didn't update them. Now, security should have been all over that. If I, as security, know that my IT is taking 6 months to patch something, I'm going to fight tooth and nail to take over that to protect the business. And to tell you, I met with one of the investigators from one of these breaches, I won't say which one, and at some point they were doing an investigation, and they found a switch, and they asked, what is connected to this switch? And the security team didn't know, and the network team didn't really know, but the security team at least didn't know. It was an entire company that the parent company had acquired 6 years before that had hundreds of endpoints on it that no one knew about. And these are major multi-billion-dollar corporations. And, literally a company-sized gap in their coverage. So what were they missing? Did they need more next-gen AI-powered blockchain tools? But no, they need to care. They need to engagement. They need to find out what was going on in the business. So what actually matters? It's results, right? You have to have a level of assurance and costs. And it has to be cost-effective. The C-level is not going to care what methods are used to reach objectives, right? So all these things that you should be doing, or these security domains or security pillars from this framework or that framework, completely irrelevant. What matters is reaching a level of assurance. And I'm going to talk about metrics in a while, because how do you actually measure that? That's a tricky one. And doing so, reaching that level of assurance in the most cost-effective manner. How you do it doesn't matter. And the best way of getting traction is actually by building trust and not necessarily numbers. And while all this security stuff, like I was saying, may be important to you, it's not going to matter to them. They don't care about what's the new trend or what's Gartner this or that. They just want to feel assured. And this is counterintuitive to most people who are really stuck on metrics and numbers and this kind of thing. And I think especially in the States, because they have a very heavy bonus structure quite often. It's based on numbers. But it shouldn't matter. And a lot of the security language is actually hurting us in our efforts, because they don't care about that stuff. They care about the result. They care about the bottom line of the business, the continuity of the business. And as long as we talk about security stuff, the more we're going to alienate them. And it's actually going to work against us. And then the other dangerous thing is more and more executives are becoming security savvy, but just enough to make things difficult. Where they're learning about, this is the approach, this is what Gartner says, or this or that. And if you're doing a proactive business-based approach, it's going to be different. It's going to be far more effective, but it's going to be different than the stuff that they're hearing. So you do have to step in and tell them no and why. And when you explain that why, as to why we're not doing what best practice says, that actually shows that you have insight and value, and that you prioritize the business over some outside influence. And that makes you someone worth listening to. So, apologies. So, English is a big one. If you can't explain your strategy, and by the way, buying some AI-powered tool is not a strategy. You have to set a goal as to where you want to be in 3 years, 5 years, in terms of levels of assurance, in terms of business enablement. Those are strategies. Speak English. I mean, if you don't know the business terms, that's fine. English works fine. Because if you don't, not only people want security experts, right? But when security experts start using security language, you lose that connection with the business. And not only are you're not going to be able to convey these technical things you want to do anyway. And by trying to do it that way, you're actually going to lose traction with them, because it's going to come across as though you don't understand what matters to them. And the other thing is, if you're using language that is our language that we've invented. So I'll give you an example. I hear CISOs complain that, on my board doesn't understand what a SIEM is. It's because SIEM is a word we made up. I can explain the SIEM to management in 30 seconds by telling them it's a thingy that collects a bunch of logs And then we can look at them together and match up the timestamps and stuff so we can correlate events and see more of what's happening and tie things together. Ah, yeah, that makes perfect sense. Just plain English. But if I start talking about seam and SOAR orchestration, they're going to have no idea what that is. And if they can't understand it, if they can't follow you as you're saying it, they're never going to get mentally involved in it. They're never going to develop a mental and emotional investment in what you're saying. And that's just going to make them not care. And one of the most important things, and this is where you have to go really big and really altruistic, is becoming someone worth listening to. As security people, we have a terrible reputation here. We're geeks, we're blockers, we're not terribly interesting, we're nerdy, we don't understand the business typically. We are just not the people you want to invite to dinner, ever. And it's really important to build that reputation, not just one-to-one, but throughout your whole organization. This has to become your brand. People have to start hearing about you because that opens doors, that primes things. I'll just give you some examples of the stuff I've done since joining the University of Salford a year ago. So when I first started, there was an audit. Within 2 weeks of me starting, 3 weeks of me starting, there was a follow-up audit, a lot of outstanding action items, this and that. And interestingly, most security people, we like to lie to the auditors. We try to make everything look rosy, so everything looks good, and then they sign off on it. And then they go and report to the board, and everything's fine, because the board listens to the auditors. And then we spend the next 11 months complaining that we don't have budget to fix all these problems that we lied to the auditors about that didn't exist. So to me, that's always been a bit ironic. Instead, be curious about your business, discover stuff, because I guarantee you for everything that the auditor finds, you'll be able to find 20. And if you come to the auditor with a heap of problems that the auditor didn't find, you're obviously not hiding, first of all. Second of all, you're identifying issues, and hopefully you're also presenting with solutions. That means those solutions go into the audit report. That means you get the support. Now, when I started at the university, this was a position that did not report anywhere near the board. And yet 1/3 of the cover page from the audit report was talking about you have a new head of information security that has developed a program, an approach that should help maturity, blah, blah, blah. So all of a sudden, they hear about this head of information security that they had absolutely no awareness before. And next thing you know, within a month on the job, I'm in the boardroom presenting the report because I was mentioned in it because of how I approached the audit. I also drive, the proactive approach that I mentioned before. Try to do improvements to business. Try to do improvements to IT processes. Fanatical engagement. Every research department, every school, every lab, every IT department, student admissions, student placements, guest lecturing. Just get absolutely everywhere. And that saves the university money because I see how things operate. I say, hey, you guys aren't aware of what A isn't aware of what B is doing, and E, your guys are doing something similar. You can consolidate. So you're identifying all these improvements. And I'm trying to address even security issues and IT issues at the source rather than, no, we don't need to spend £5 million on a SOC. I could streamline these IT processes and bring the number of issues down so much that, a couple of heads of staff can take care of them. Now, negotiations is another one. I had one solution where, the cost was of nearly £500,000, and we got over a 90% discount on it. And I remember the head of procurement looking at this, and he actually called me. He's like, he didn't understand the quotes because I had to provide the initial quote and the final quote. He's like, what's changed? I'm like, only the price. And he just couldn't fathom that someone had gotten that kind of discount because they're used to this very bureaucratic, standardized framework where you ask 3 companies to do a bid, and they're within 10% of each other, and then you formally select one, and then you try to whittle a few percent off of that. So they hadn't ever had anyone getting such aggressive discounts. But he reports to the CFO, and you can bet that the CFO heard about someone saving them more than almost £500,000 on purchasing. So that's the kind of thing that gets your name mentioned around town, and it brings you more traction, more influence with everyone around you. Mentoring staff is another one. I split salaries that I was allocated for one head of staff. I split them in 2 because I believe in potential. I believe in development. I hire people almost sight unseen if I can just believe in their potential. I don't do a potential traditional interview process. I don't rely on HR. I do a post on LinkedIn, I see who replies, I check them out, have a chat with them. You have the potential, and I will invest in mentoring and training them. And by the way, that information security skills gap we saw before, if I go back to the parking lot analogy, if I get a 10-year veteran CISSP and pay him £70,000 a year, if I put him in the parking lot, he's going to go, did I even go there? Yeah. I just realized, did I even do the car factory analogy? I don't even know. I may have skipped it. So just saving through mentoring staff, and then I guest lecture, which builds tremendous traction for the students. It doesn't necessarily make the university any money, but it's so on mission to what they do. It's what they believe in. So it gets you seen in a very positive light. I developed a leadership course for the professional development side of things. I'm not getting paid for this, but the university is selling this course and making money. I do a lot of public speaking, so the university's name gets mentioned at all these events. I help with student placements. I had one company approach me. They saw me give a lecture in London, and they came up to me afterwards, like, I saw your talk, and I just want to tell you, and this is a FTSE 250 company, that they had taken like 10 of our students a couple of years earlier, but it was a disaster. It was a placement year, and they couldn't get any of their people to really get anything out of these students. So like, could you come in and give us a talk about how you do this? And then that way we can learn from you, and we can take another 10 students off of you. So finding students placements is a very high priority for the university. So these are all things that build your name and your reputation and your influence within the organization. And I get asked quite often when they hear these things, like, what's your job? Because none of this seems like it's part of your job. And it's not. But it gives me the influence I need to then do my job. And a lot of people say, well, it's wasted effort because it's not what you should be doing. It's like, yeah, but it gives me the effort. If I take a year to do this, the next year I will be able to get 10 times as much done. So it's very much well worth the effort. The fundamental takeaway I could say is engage. Engage fanatically. Every person you meet could be an opportunity. You don't know. They may seem useless to you right now. They may not be in 6 months. Every activity you come across, every time you hear about a new project, find out more. Find out what's going on. Because when you're talking to someone, especially at board level, and they mention this and that, and you, oh yeah, I know him. Oh yeah, I know that professor. Oh yeah, I know that guy. Yeah, he's working on so and so. She's working on this. That makes an impact. That has a real effect. Every chance you help, take it. Take a chance to help, but be humble about it. Don't expect something in return. Just build that reputation of someone really altruistic who always has the best of intentions. That way, when you do ask for something, they know it's for a good reason. And always take accountability. Lots of security, people in business first. I see a lot of security practitioners, honestly, like twisting things to get approvals, to get funding, to get budget. That's not necessarily needed, or that could, if we take a step back, be solved more further upstream. We may not get extra budget for that. We may not get an extra 2 heads of staff for them, but we're saving the company money, and that should matter. That will take some time to resonate in the organization. They won't notice that right away. But after a while, they're like, oh, hold on, why are we spending 1/3 on information security compared to our peers? And that's when they start realizing, oh, you're doing a lot of proactive work. This is very, very good. Every chance to contribute helps build your reputation. That helps to build your influence. That increases your visibility. That it increases both what you know and see about your organization because you're engaging, but it also slowly and holistically on a very broad scale, you won't even notice this at first, it increases your kind of signature, how people see you and how many people see you. And I think the intent is very important. You should never be a showman. You shouldn't do things to showboat about them. Just small, consistent efforts. It's better to help everyone a little and for everyone to be able to say, you know what, he's never not helped someone than to do one big gesture and then neglect a bunch of other people. The only way of doing that is for it to be part of who you are. You have to care. It just has to be part of your personal brand, your persona, just really, really who you are. And we're talking a lot about engaging up, but engaging down, and I'll get to that later, is equally as important. A lot of people neglect that. I think creating stories is a very good example. Through all these interactions, you're creating all these examples where you help someone, and that's only going to win you favor. Just saturate the entire environment with that positive brand, that optimism, that leadership, that taking charge, everything. That will make you someone worth listening to. I want to talk about strategic thinking, right? I see, first of all, I'll do this backwards. Boards love strategic direction, right? This is my objection. It's 3 to 5 years away. This is why I think it's going to work. That's what boards want. Because boards expect, a quarterly report the last 10 minutes as to how you're doing to that one big goal. Don't bother them with the details. We have a bad habit of doing that. Most of us give level of details that's not just too high for the board. We're probably like 3 levels off. It's got to be really high level. You don't have to go into that much detail if you've built the trust. They don't care about risk scores and incident counts, no matter how much we think they do. One thing I hear a lot about security people is the level of frustration. The trying to do things, trying to do the next thing and not getting there and bashing their heads against the wall. And because there's bigger things at work. There's cultural issues. There's all kinds of stuff. I think one of the best pieces of advice I can give to people is set the destination. Imagine where you want to be in 3, 4, 5 years' time. That's your goal, right? You don't know the path to get there. You have to realize that you do not know the path to get there. You can reach that destination. You just don't know what the road is. And you have to discover that road. So when you get a no, see that as a positive, because I've just found my first obstruction. I now know that this is a point where I have to do something different. I have to change direction. I have to take a left here. And you actually get to the point where when you get a no, that's a confirmation. That's almost like, okay, I've identified a challenge here that needs to be overcome. I've identified the first step to reaching that final destination. And then you start working on that. You work around it, you work over it, you figure out something out. And you may have to address a far bigger problem to get rid of that particular problem, and that will make the next 2 or 3 steps easy. So stop getting frustrated. When you hit that bump, take a step back, look at the big picture, and really see that when you get that resistance, there's a reason that resistance is there. There's probably a more fundamental issue at work, cultural, personal, political. You have to go and you have to address that. So take those negatives as insights, as really informative as to what you really should be doing at a strategic level. I want to talk about metrics. As I mentioned, what should we do about metrics? Should we have high-level technical metrics, or should we have just high-level strategic metrics? Operational stuff. I've seen so many different kinds of metrics. I see all the CISOs talk about spend a tremendous amount of time on metrics. I mean, some of them, I swear, they spend probably a third of their time just compiling metrics for the board. And I think they're absolutely rubbish, to be honest. They are arbitrary numbers based on other arbitrary numbers, based on other arbitrary numbers, based on random scales, and based on a correlation of other data that you don't even know if you have a complete picture. It's so far removed from reality that it's pointless. But the board wants metrics, right? I tell them I will give you one metric. Now, you may or may not be able to do this, but I'm sure you'll be able to do this to some degree. I tell them I will give you one metric, and that metric is on a scale from 1 to 10. Actually, I won't even give you a metric. We can use one metric. On a scale from 1 to 10, the only metric that matters is on a scale from 1 to 10, how much do you trust me to deliver a shirt? Now, that sounds ridiculous, but that's my goal. I don't need to justify any of this stuff to you. I'm not going to bring you numbers around firewall rules and incident numbers and all this stuff. What matters is how much faith I have generated in you, in me, to get the job done. And I know that sounds ridiculous, but I was actually on a call the other day, last week, with the co-founder of a company, and we're talking CEO and co-founder. I think they're about 4 billion market cap. And when I told him that the only metric I care about is on a scale from 1 to 10, how much you trust me to deliver the job, he smiled from ear to ear. He was so fed up of all these technical metrics. Like, all I want is someone to go in there, dig, find the problem, and give me solutions. And that's what I tend to do, because I don't follow these conventional frameworks, because I believe very business aligned. Instead of applying all these approaches, just go through the org chart. Find out absolutely everything that people are doing, what systems they're using, what data they're using. How should we build security around that? What issues do we have? and you tend to identify 100 times more issues than they were even aware of. Now, just the fact that you're identifying all this stuff, and then the fact that you're presenting to them, gives them a level of trust. I don't need a number. I just know that he's spotting 100 times more stuff than everybody else has ever spotted. So, and clearly their numbers were wrong, so why do I care about numbers? So that's how I feel about metrics. You're going to need some metrics, but the more it's about the trust and the personal relationship, the more flexibility you're going to have. If I do have to give metrics, I like to give visibility on a scale from 1 to 10, capability and maturity, and they kind of feed into it. How much can I see? How much can I action? And of this, how mature do I actually think I am in terms of actually sorting things and consistency and that kind of stuff? More than that, really unnecessary. We talk a lot about risk, but again, we're getting stuck in language because our risk is not their risk. At the end of the day, it's not necessarily about risk. For them, it's about cost. It's the cost of a breach, the cost of IT, the cost of security. And when I say security, I mean assurance. Do we feel safe? Not SecOps, because that's just a money pit. SecOps is the stuff you've missed further upstream. It should be kept at a minimum. And the cost of opportunity. Are you enabling or are you blocking? So that's going to be a factor. And does security have to be a cost at all? I mean, the same company I mentioned earlier, I told them, look, if we do all this stuff upstream, we can tremendously reduce the amount of incidents you have on your existing, and it's going to take the SOC workload from 100% to 10%. Then you got all this 90% of SOC capacity. You've got the breadth of capabilities, but you're only using 10% capacity. We can resell that as a managed service. So now security is self-funding and actually a profit center. I think this is what they want to hear. They don't want to hear about risk. And I used to be kind of obsessed with quantitative risk analysis because I thought it was so much better than qualitative, obviously. I've kind of given up on that. It doesn't really matter. I keep chiming. And I'll give you a great example. I recently had penetration tests. I do some consultancy work. And the results were quite bad. But I wasn't going to presume, it's a very large business with over 10,000 employees. And I'm not about to assume what the impact to them was. I don't have the business. I understand the business far more to say. But I'm not as well. I'm going to trust them to tell me what's what. Apologies. And I told them, look, this is what we found, and this is the potential impact in terms of what could happen. But when it came to what's the damage, what's the business downtime, how long and how expensive would this be, I told them that's entirely for you to decide. And their answer, when I asked them, I'm not going to tell you how long or how long it would take to recover and what the cost would be. And their answer was simply, we wouldn't. It was that serious. And that got immediate traction. And I think the more you leave things to them as well, the more it forces them to actually think about the impacts. And that builds emotional investment on their side. So that's a very, very good trick to have. So yeah, that's kind of the last line there. It builds that mental and emotional investment. So taking charge is another thing. Like, forget what's your job or what isn't your job. Just take charge of as many things as you can. Get in there, get your hands dirty, and help people. If you do that engagement, it breeds knowledge of what's going on because you're getting in there and you're getting your hands dirty and finding out about it first time. The more people see you know what's going on, because you've taken that engagement, the more people start trusting you. And that trust eventually, by the higher ups, will translate into authority. But even without the formal authority, taking charge, it leads you to be seen as someone who helps, but also as an authority. You reduce resistance. It reduces resistance for you as well. And it's going to increase your support because you're always there to help. You're always there to help out, regardless of what it is. People will come to you for advice. And this allows you to find out about additional stuff as well. So cars and coffee. There's a reason I call this slide cars and coffee. So we're talking about approaching the exec, getting stuff done, influencing, building a reputation, a brand as someone to listen to. But a lot of people then immediately charge in as like, I need this, I need this, I need this. You have to focus on the relationship as at least as much as on what you need. So about a year ago, I engaged an executive, and she was doing her annual address. and I was literally nobody. But I went down to the stage after she was done. I said, you know what? I really liked what you said. I noticed you were quite humble about this. I found this quite funny. That was nice to see some humility and some sense of humor. I see you're very strategically focused. I noticed that you took these things into consideration. Quite appreciative of that. By the way, I'd like to tell you about some of the stuff I'm doing in this part of the business to help something in line with that. Set up a coffee with the chief executive. Before, and this is totally doable. But did I go in there and say, hey, I need £500,000 to do this and this and this? No. We spent most of the time talking about cars because I noticed that she made a few comments and a few car analogies. So I was like, I'm a bit of a petrol head. And that's how we kind of built the relationship. So it's important you have to feed the relationship at least as much as what you want to get out of it. As a general rule, never ask for anything, whether it's senior or even the average person. You don't want them to feel like you're just someone who walks in and gets something from them and walks out. But ultimately, if you're being altruistic to the organization, you should be asking things because they will be helping them or everyone. So hopefully that'll be kind of self-fulfilling. Style and substance is not typically something you would discuss in cybersecurity, but it does matter because you never know. So your brand, all this influencing, it's very much part of your brand. It's who you are seen as in the organization. And I think it's important to make a really good first impression because you never know when opportunities will present themselves. You don't want to all of a sudden have an opportunity to speak to your CFO looking like Homer Simpson in a dirty t-shirt. That's an obvious, or an ill-fitting suit and that kind of stuff. So always be prepared to make that positive impression. Leverage conversation starters. Be a storyteller. Storytelling, there's a course on LinkedIn on storytelling. Take it. Storytelling is immensely powerful. Anything that you tell as a story will be remembered 10 times better than anything that's told as just the straight truth. A assortment of topics you can present. Be savvy about stuff that can build bridges, that can close gaps between people. And one thing I think is quite important is to be seen as someone who does things for a reason, even in the little things. Like, why do you wear those shoes? Why do you have that watch? Why did you pick that tie? Or, I've got a little bracelet. It's got, the Dutch national colors. That's my heritage. And it's got an anchor on it. My grandmother used to have an anchor in her garden. And my father worked on the oil, the Shell super tankers during the Second World War. So these little things are conversation starters. I wear an Omega moon watch. There's a fantastic history to that watch. So all these little things that show an appreciation of the details in an area that may be of interest to an executive, whether it's cars or travel or watches or whatever, it shows them, hey, you are someone who actually pays attention to the details. And that's going to carry over to their assumption of you in your work. So when you're asking them something, it's not for some stupid reason. You've thought things through. You have a real reason why you're doing things. Then obviously you want to come across professional. So these little things do make a difference, believe it or not. And we get to downstream engagement. I just want to end on this because it's often overlooked and underappreciated. Another picture I see quite often on LinkedIn is this blaming Dave picture. Now, we blame user error far too much. In more mature industries, it simply doesn't exist. If you go to aviation or healthcare or oil and gas, there's no such thing as user error. There's always a deeper root cause, and they go in to fix that. Whether it's training, whether it's labeling equipment, whether it's making them more error-proof or whatever. We blame Dave far too much. And we talk about the weakest link. Users are the first link, they're not the weakest. And I've seen so many incidents get blamed on, the user clicked the phishing link. Hey, click the phishing link, but then his local image was compromised because you didn't maintain it properly, and then your gateway was compromised because you didn't update the firmware, and then your routers got compromised because you had default passwords, and your servers got compromised because you didn't patch them. Is it really Dave's fault at that point? So take that accountability. The other thing is authority versus influence. Yeah, we can get the authority to tell people what to do, but you should measure your success by how little you actually use your authority. If you're able to influence and get people to do what you need them to do without ever having to rely on the authority, that's a good sign that you're doing a good job. Don't police, enable, translate that knowledge. When you do that discovery of your business to really find out what people need and what's going on, you're going to learn a lot of stuff. Reinvest that into the business. Help the business be more capable, more agile. It's not just about stopping stuff. And the more you help people, the more you interact with them, the more you have this positive reputation, the more people become your eyes and ears, and in some cases even arms. They will full on help you. They will start reporting things to you. They will not fear getting their wrist slapped, so they'll let you know about stuff going on far, far away in your organization. And I'll do a quick story because I am running a bit over. I apologize. A few years ago, I worked in a company and they had a call center. And there was a chap there who I got this email thread. It was about almost 60 emails long between legal, HR, and InfoSec. And this chap had all kinds of medical issues, and he needed a hearing aid to hear. And the problem is he couldn't fit his headset over his hearing aid, so he couldn't use it, and he really struggled to hear. Now, he had a thing that he plugged into the handset, the base, and it would beam things directly into his hearing aid. But he wasn't allowed to use it from InfoSec because it used Bluetooth. Now, this had been going on between HR and legal, who didn't want to get sued, who wanted him to work, and InfoSec was a policy violation for 9 months. And I found out about it. I'm like, can you have him bring this in tomorrow? And he gave me a show and tell. And I was like, this is fine. He's on the 4th floor. There's thick stone walls. There's absolutely no additional security risk here. I'll find an inspection by the end of the day. Done. So great relationship with this guy. Khalid was his name, I believe. Here's the funny thing. GDPR and clean desk incidents dropped by 32% the following month. Because all of a sudden, all those posters from all the awareness campaigns on the wall had a face associated to it. It was my face, someone who came up to the floor and helped their coworker that they've been seeing struggling for 9 months. The psychological effect of that is not to be underestimated. Don't be the police. Be someone who's there to help, that has a positive brand, positive attitude. Shameless plugs. If you look on the cybersecurityprofessionals.com, I've got a 3-day information security leadership program if you're interested. Again, Influencing InfoSec will be out probably a month from now. And if you feel like checking out my book, Rethinking InfoSec, I would really appreciate that. Thank you very much for your time. Feel free to contact me, Greg Vandergaast, on LinkedIn. I hope I didn't make too much of a hash, and I will hand this back to Maggie.
Really interesting to look at security from all those different perspectives, and certainly a great deal of food for thought there, Greg. Thank you so much for joining us today to share your expertise and insight. It's really appreciated.
Thanks for having me.